I kind of expected it, but I wasn't as emotionally prepared as I thought I'd be for the slights, disrespect, and outright refusal when it came to intimacy. All of it pointed to the same thing. She was either having an affair or thinking about having an affair. Or maybe she was just tired of being my wife. I had kind of resolved myself to losing her. She had made it easier to accept over the last few months. What I didn't understand was why she didn't just leave. I mean, why drag it out? Just say goodbye and get on with your life. I didn't move money around because we didn't have a lot. We lived in debt. We got the house for free, but it had belonged to my grandmother, and we moved in after she passed away. I saw some signs I didn't like even then. So I talked to my folks and they agreed to keep the house in their names for at least a year, just to be sure we had owned our own home. We lived there for 6 years before Sandy had a little too much wine one night and dozed off, leaving a dozen candles burning, one a little too close to the drapes. The alarms, I woke her up and she managed to get out, but the whole living room was on fire by then. The firemen got there just about the same time I did, getting ready to put out the fire. When I told them about the gun collection and all the ammunition I had stored, a few rounds popped. So they pulled back a safe distance and let it burn. One of my best friends was the captain of that particular station, and he wrote it up as being too far gone when they arrived to help. The insurance policy didn't have a clause about things being excluded because they paid out, leaving us with about 30 grand. It was more than I thought we'd get, so we took it and moved into Graham's house. We still had about 20 grand, and she'd get half of that. That was enough to start her off in a decent apartment. I'd stay right where I was. I'd do a few more odds and ends. If we split, she was going to be pretty disappointed. Like I said, I expected it. I just didn't expect the way it happened was pretty cold-blooded. I was working a different shift, with hours that were later than hers. It was winter, and it got dark pretty early where I was. I noticed her car wasn't in the garage, and the porch light wasn't on. I came in, calling her name. She didn't answer, so I found her at her vanity, putting on her makeup. She was wearing an LBD, not the one I was used to. It was a brand new one with a higher hem and a lower neckline. I watched her for a few minutes as she ignored me. Somewhere along the line I asked, "Am I?" She replied, "I've got a date." I just stared at her until she got nervous. "Did you hear me?" I said, "I have a date. I'm going out with another man." "No," she replied. "What she asked," I said. I said no. No means no. You can go out, see anyone you want, have intimacy with anyone you want. As soon as you move out, I'll file the papers, but you will not do it while we live under the same roof. Why? Why don't you pack a few things and stay somewhere else for a few days? I'll get everything lined up in the meantime, and we can talk about splitting everything up later. Her laugh seemed almost like a crow somehow. I'm not leaving. You're not going to like it here. When it's mine, I'll decorate it just the way I like. If you prove to be an ass, at least you'll get most of the money when we're forced to sell. Do us both a favor and move back in with your folks until this is over. I told her I was leaving in about 30 minutes and not to be there when I got back or I'd call the cops. I said I'd think of something to get her thrown out. I heard they keep you for 48 hours for domestic abuse. I think I can get the locks changed and a restraining order by then. She seemed a bit shaken when I smiled. Whatever you think, don't do it. I mean it, Henry. The matter is settled. You'll mess it up. Life is a matter of then and then another one. I need to get this lipstick. The bright red color should be perfect, don't you think? I just smiled and left the bedroom. I knew she didn't have the nerve to have him pick her up, which meant she was going to meet him. I went through the garage and picked up the aluminum baseball bat I used in the summertime. 4 good swings took care of her headlights and taillights. She wouldn't be leaving in that car. I walked back in and saw her purse sitting on the counter. I opened it up and noticed the 6. I took out a pack of condoms as I pulled out her phone, not wanting to make a mess. I took it out into the garage, took out the battery, put it on my workbench and grabbed a hammer and smashed it into 3 pieces. I put the phone back together without the battery and dropped it back into the purse. I almost put pinpricks in the condoms but stopped, thinking she would claim it was mine. She came into the kitchen as I was pouring a cup of coffee, carrying the highest. She was wearing heels I'd never seen before. She frowned when she saw me outside. She screamed, pointing at the door. I just smiled and sipped my coffee. She sighed. "All right, if that's the way you want to be, look for the cops here shortly. You might want to call your dad so you'll have the bail money when you can get out." I took another sip of coffee. "Why would the cops come? I haven't threatened you or laid a hand on you. All I've done is refuse to let you drive me from my home. That's not what I'll tell the cops. You threatened me when I asked for a divorce and got verbally abusive. I fear for my life. They always believe the woman. I'm not kidding. Henry, you've got about 30 minutes until I make the calls. She stomped out as well as she could in those heels. 5 minutes later, you could hear her screaming through the door. She burst in, and the look on her face made me a little nervous. You bastard, what have you done to my car? You must think I hurt your car. You shouldn't leave it parked on the street like that. She just stared for a second. Never mind. I'll just call him to pick me up. I'll even let you see me kiss him when I get in. Don't be surprised if you don't see my head as we pull off. It was my turn to make her nervous when I grinned. It'll give us a chance to get acquainted. I can tell him what a crazy you can be. I hope he doesn't have long. After all, you're showing him that marriage vows don't matter much to you. She was annoyed when she found her phone wasn't working. She stomped off and then came back wearing sneakers and carrying her heels. Have a good evening now, I said, still smiling, although I could still hear her cursing as she walked down the street. It was almost too much when I saw her knock on the first door and not be allowed in. She must have. She repeated it half a block until she realized no one was going to help her. Thanks, Mom. I'd called her when I came outside, and she called all the neighbors I grew up with on that street. Everyone knew me and liked me. She didn't, though. I knew she'd get to a phone soon, so I sat back down and waited. It took the cops about 20 minutes to respond. I didn't know it then, but she'd walked back, staying in the shadows and waiting. By the time the cops arrived, I knew one of them was a girl I'd graduated with. I invited them in and offered them a cup of coffee. They seemed nervous, so I guess they'd come on a domestic disturbance call. They'd probably seen some broken furniture and abrasions on my knuckles and torn clothing. They shook their heads. Then what makes you think there was any disturbance? She said you'd threatened her. Henry told her you were going to mess her up. When she told you she was leaving, I'm sorry, Henry, but the law is clear. We have to take you in. That sounds serious. How serious is filing a false report? I asked the man who spoke for the first time if you've got any proof of that. Now would be a good time to show us, so I showed them the video I had made with both a camera and my cell phone. Both cops frowned. Well, now this gives you a lot of options, Henry, filing a false report. It's not up to you, it's up to us. You can use the tape to get a restraining order. You can clearly hear her say, "You'll get yours." It's a definite threat. If we've ever heard one, you don't need to be in close proximity with each other right now. You can file tomorrow and give our names as backup in the meantime. If you have any way of securing the house so she can't get back in, it might be a good idea. If she does come back, give us a call. I remember how you can be when someone wrongs you, so don't let it ride out in court and walk away. You heard me right. Yes, Sergeant. I know you've been called that since high school, especially since you started carrying a gun. Old habits, you know. You can't hide it under that uniform. It's still a world-class ass, whoever you have in your life right now is a lucky man, Heather. She went bright red and stomped out. It seems I've suddenly developed the ability to upset any woman I come in contact with. The guy grinned. You're right, that's a world-class rump, but no one is getting to see it right now. She just went through a nasty divorce. You're not the only one with a spouse who wants to date. Please don't make us come back tonight. They didn't have to. While I was talking to the police, my wife had the bright idea of taking my car. The problem was that she'd thrown her keys on the kitchen counter and couldn't come in with the police there. Then she saw them. I always kept the keys to the monster on the workbench. That's what she'd called it the first time she'd seen it. It was old but in perfect shape, a 1989 full, it's a size 4. It was a wheel-drive Suburban. I think you could have fit both our other cars in it. It was only driven when I needed to haul something on my trailer to pull a friend's pontoon, 2 or 3 times a summer to fish, and as a snow vehicle. If you paid attention, you'd never get stuck. What she didn't factor in was me disconnecting the chain to the garage opener in case this very thing happened. To keep her out, she fired up the beast, which was making a tremendous noise in the small space. She hit the garage opener and waited until she thought it was up and floored it, thinking to get away as quickly as possible. She should have turned on the lights, though. If she had, she would have seen that the garage door wasn't opening. The 454 horsepower and the traction provided by the low gearing meant that the beast was able to accelerate rapidly, causing the vehicle to move backwards and collide with the police car. The impact was so strong that it sent the car several feet back, resulting in significant damage to the front end. As this was happening, Heather was reaching for the door handle when the beast suddenly moved. If she'd been another 5 seconds late, it could have been a lot worse. Her partner wasn't so lucky. He'd opened the door to get in when she hit the cruiser, and the door knocked him about 10 feet down the drive. Heather's a redhead, and I know her well. She has the temper to match the hair. While I rushed up to check on Officer John, I saw that she was dragging. My wife, who is usually very calm, was screaming at the top of her voice as she was dragged away by the police. She was pretty out of it by then, and only moaned once she was handcuffed. Heather rushed back to her car and called for backup. The officers radioed for assistance and went back to 411 Elm Drive. Officer John was unconscious. His face had caught most of the impact. I noticed that his nose was broken, so I was careful to cradle his head to avoid any risk of spinal injuries or choking on his own blood. I held his head for about 20 minutes until the first ambulance arrived. 10 minutes later, it seemed like every officer on duty was there. Heather rode with Officer Johns. John went to the hospital after giving his statement to the investigating officer. He also referred me to Ginger, who got a free ride in an ambulance too. She ended up with bruises, a few contusions from the airbag, and a pretty good case of whiplash. I went over the whole thing 4 different times before they were satisfied. I also got to know a couple more of the cops in this small town, including the man in charge. He was also the father of a friend. He used to be our baseball coach when we were in junior high. I'd like to know if there's any word on Officer John's coach. It didn't matter what rank he held, he would always be coach to me. Henry said that so far, it doesn't look too bad. They'll know more when the MRI and X-rays are examined. I thanked him and was walking off when he called out, "Just so you know, your wife seems to be fine." He was joking, of course, but I thought it was funny. After all, being charged with all the things we can think of can be called fine. And of course, you can charge her with extreme stupidity. It wasn't too bad here. Here's the aftermath. Ginger got out on bond, hitting the bank and taking out 19. I left her with $1,000, which she needed to pay her parents back for bail and to hire a good lawyer. I still had the restraining order in effect, so we talked through our lawyers. Our first meeting went badly for her. I had my parents along with my lawyer because their input was relevant to the case. Her lawyer listed her demands. She wants the house, or at least half its value. I knew she'd already lined up a realtor friend to buy it for her and then sell it back, using her half of the proceeds for the down payment. She knew I'd never agree to sell it to her. My lawyer pulled a paper out of his briefcase and passed it over. He seemed surprised, and she screamed, "What?" Her lawyer explained that her father owns the house, and his name isn't on the deed. You can't get half of something you don't own. She was still angry when he named the next demand. My client wants all the new furnishings in the house. This includes the living room suite, the dining suite, the furniture from all the bedrooms, the silver service, and the new kitchen appliances. My lawyer responded with more paperwork. Everything we had purchased was paid for by check from my father's account. We would go pick something out. I'd take her. I went home and got my dad in his truck. He'd write the check and I'd give him cash. All the furniture in the rental is owned by the landlord. I'm not sure if it's community property, but he did agree to let you pick out one of the bedroom suites for nostalgia. I believe in the end, almost everything we'd owned was out of her reach. I fixed her car the next weekend, delivering it to her parents' house when I knew they were trying to make bail for their daughter. She could have it as well as the last 10 payments. The judge called me and my lawyer into his chambers during the divorce. He was looking over the papers. He tried to hide the grin, but he couldn't. He was pretty cute. You knew this was going to happen, didn't you? I just shrugged. I didn't exactly envision this scenario. I had a feeling it wasn't going to end well. I was just protecting myself by showing her in grand the money she took. If she'll just sign the papers, we'll call it even. He grunted, fair enough. Back out in the courtroom, he told Ginger that everything was documented and legitimate and there was nothing he could do about it. I had agreed to let her keep all the money she took if she would. I told her to agree to the divorce. If she didn't, I'd go after her for the rest of it. She was furious, but she had no choice. The judge slammed his gavel down, and I was a free man. She had to forget about me and focus on her other problems, filing a false police report and assaulting an officer by vehicle. They added a lot of trivial stuff that got thrown out because they were pissed at her over Officer John. She got lucky. She ended up on probation for a year. I ran into her a month later at Walmart. She wanted to talk, so we ordered drinks at Subway and sat down. It took her a minute to get her voice back. "Why were you so cruel to me?" I could ask the same question. "When exactly did you decide to check out of our marriage? You could have made a clean break. Not made the last few months so miserable. I'd like to know why you brought up our date. You lived with me long enough to know I wouldn't just roll over." She sat for a minute before speaking. "I wasn't happy and hadn't been for a long time. I hated our house burning down. I hated the move here, and I hated leaving our friends. I guess that's what started it. Looking back, I knew you were a nice guy, and I should have just talked. I have to say, that was one of the dumbest things I've ever heard you say. I wasn't keen on moving back home either. I liked where we lived. If you'd have given me the least idea you wanted to stay, we would have taken the insurance money and bought something else. Even after we moved, we could have still moved back. I think that may have been some of it, but the truth was you wanted out. Why the big song and dance? Ultimately, I know it wasn't all your fault, but I held you responsible for everything. I wasn't interested in anyone else. I just wanted to hurt you. I'm sorry for my behavior. You were right. We should have just talked it out and parted on good terms. I got up and left. You need to see someone, Ginger. You're pretty upset. I hear you're moving back home, so I doubt I'll see you again. I'm going to try to live a decent life. If you fall in love with someone else, use our experience as a learning tool. I didn't say goodbye. I just walked away. I saw her 4 years later when I went back for the funeral of a friend. She looked pretty much the same, maybe 5 lb heavier with longer hair. She saw me and smiled, but we never spoke. That suited me best. I decided to leave the past in the past. It was about 2 years later. A few years later, I bumped into Sergeant Sweet Cheeks at the gun range. She was in jeans and still had the killer ass. We chatted and I found out she was engaged to Officer John, who had made a full recovery. He got a pretty good settlement from my auto insurance, and they were planning to use it for a down payment on a house. 18 months later, I saw her again and asked how she liked it. She laughed. He doesn't seem to think as highly of my ass as you do. I caught him with another woman. The woman was a man. We didn't part on the best terms. I'd like to say I'm sorry, but I'm not. Why not? Because now you're a free agent again. I hope I never got a chance with that sweet ass in high school. This might be my chance. Just so you know, even if it is, world-class ass. I like everything that's hooked to it, including that brain of yours. I hear you're a detective now. Can you use that superior brain power to deduce what I'm thinking? She colored a little before laughing. If it's what I think you're thinking, I'd have to lock you up. Anal is still illegal in 9 states. It was my turn to glow, but I was smiling. Is this one of those states? No, you got lucky. If you really like this superior ass and are willing to treat me like I deserve to be treated, you might find I may be inclined to share that I actually like it with the right man. Pick me up at 7 wearing a suit and don't say anything stupid. Now shut up and shoot. I showed up on the dot at 7 wearing my best suit, as my wife of 6 years can tell you. She never did cure me of saying stupid things. Although our 5-year-old year, my daughter is trying to help her. I don't know if it's genetics or training, but even though I can be pretty stupid sometimes, I knew better than to complain about it. I didn't get her in bed until we got married, 9 months after our first date. All I can tell you is it was worth the wait, and she's now Captain Sweet Cheeks. I may say stupid things, but I don't call her Sweet Cheeks in public. She likes it in the bedroom, though. Ginger did see someone during her probation. I don't know if it helped or not. She remarried twice, and the second one seems to be a keeper. He keeps her on a pretty tight leash and reminds her of me when she gets out of hand. I told her I'm not the only one who plays the long game, and it seems to keep her centered. At least, that's what the cousin who told me about it all said. I can't say much more than that. Our daughter Kelly got married today. Our wedding present to her was my grandmother's old house. Heather never really liked it. When my parents passed, we moved into their house. It's a big 2. The story goes that our son Mark will get the old farmhouse when we pass, which won't be anytime soon. I hope that after Kelly left on her honeymoon, I surprised Chief Sweet Cheeks with tickets to one of those river cruises. It's a 25th wedding anniversary present she'd always wanted to go on, and I'd finally saved up the money to take her 2 weeks rambling through Europe. It's her dream vacation, and it got me some really good loving and a rare shot at her back door. I have to go now. Sweet Cheeks is calling me back to bed, giving me a little blue pill and a glass of water. It looks like it's going to be a very nice vacation. That's the end of today's story.